70 years of honest work ended with a brutal eviction notice signed by their own flesh and blood. Left destitute, a heartbroken elderly couple sought refuge in a rotting, forgotten log cabin. They expected to quietly fade away. Instead, they pried open the floorboards and unearthed $265 million. For 42 years, Raoul and Beatrice Steeves were the bedrock of their small, tight-knit community in Peoria, Illinois. Raoul, a man whose hands were permanently calloused from decades of manual labor, owned and operated Steeves Hardware. Beatrice, a former high school English teacher with a gentle smile and an unyielding spirit, managed the books and kept their lives running with quiet efficiency. They were the kind of people who extended lines of credit to neighbors going through hard times and spent their weekends volunteering at the local parish. They had lived a modest, disciplined life, pouring every spare cent into their savings, their home, and most importantly, their only child, Derek. Derek Steeves was his parents' greatest pride. Sent to an expensive private university on Raoul and Beatrice's dime, Derek had quickly climbed the ranks of a prominent Chicago investment firm. He wore tailored Italian suits, drove a sleek imported sedan, and spoke in the fast-paced, confident cadence of a man who commanded boardrooms. To Raoul and Beatrice, Derek's success was the ultimate validation of their lifelong sacrifices. When Raoul's knees began to fail him at the age of 71, and Beatrice suffered a mild heart flutter that required hospitalization, Derek swooped in to play the role of the dutiful son. During a rare weekend visit to his childhood home, he sat his aging parents down at the oak dining table, the very table where Beatrice had helped him with his middle school math homework, and laid out a polished, professional proposal. "Mom, Dad, you've worked hard enough," Derek had said, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity, placing a hand over his mother's trembling fingers. "It's time for you to retire. Let me take the wheel. If you sign over the power of attorney and transfer the store and the house into a blind family trust, I can manage your assets. I'll invest the equity, generate a massive passive income, and you two can finally take that cruise to Alaska you've been talking about for 20 years. Trusting their son completely, Raoul and Beatrice signed the towering stack of legal documents. They handed over the deeds to their paid-off 4-bedroom home, the title to the hardware store, and the entirety of their retirement savings. They believed they were securing their twilight years. In reality, they were signing their own financial death warrants. 14 months later, the illusion shattered with the arrival of a certified letter from the county sheriff's office. It was a Tuesday morning. Beatrice was tending to her prized hydrangeas when the postman handed her the thick envelope. She opened it at the kitchen counter, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until she landed on a single, paralyzing phrase. Notice of foreclosure and eviction. Panic setting in, Raoul spent hours on the phone trying to reach Derek. It took 3 days before Derek's wife, Patricia, a fiercely ambitious socialite who had never hidden her disdain for her in-laws' blue-collar roots, finally answered. Her tone was like ice. "Derek can't come to the phone right now, Raoul," Patricia said coldly. "And frankly, there's nothing left to discuss. The real estate development Derek invested the trust into went bankrupt. The bank called in the collateral. Everything is gone. The hardware store is being liquidated on Friday, and you have 30 days to vacate the house. It's just business. You should have read the fine print." The line went dead. The devastation was absolute. Derek had used his parents' entire life's work as a gamble on a high-risk luxury condominium project in downtown Chicago. When the market dipped and the developers defaulted, the bank seized everything attached to Derek's trust. He had sacrificed his parents to save his own firm from insolvency. He wouldn't even look them in the eye to apologize. Stripped of their dignity, their home, and their savings, Raoul and Beatrice were effectively orphaned by their own child. At over 70 years old, they found themselves staring into the abyss of homelessness. Their social security checks were barely enough to cover Beatrice's heart medication, let alone rent in a decent neighborhood. As they began packing their lives into cardboard boxes, crying silently in the hollow echoes of their bedroom, a second letter arrived. This one bore the return address of Kenneth Lyles, a probate attorney based in Little Rock, Arkansas. Beatrice, her eyes swollen from weeping, opened the letter. It concerned her eccentric, long-estranged great-uncle, Vernon Hayes. Vernon had been a deeply paranoid, anti-government survivalist who retreated into the deep woods of the Ozark Mountains in the late 1980s. The family hadn't heard from him in over 3 decades. According to Mr. Lyles, Vernon had recently passed away at the age of 94. As his last living blood relative, Beatrice had inherited his sole earthly possession, a remote, 5-acre plot of heavily forested land in Newton County, Arkansas, complete with an off-grid log cabin. "It's in the middle of nowhere, Bay," Raoul whispered, looking at the faded Polaroid of the property included in the legal packet. The cabin looked barely habitable, a rough-hewn structure sagging under the weight of overgrown ivy and surrounded by dense, intimidating timber. "It's a roof, Raoul," Beatrice replied, her voice cracking but resolute. She placed her hand over his. "Our son took everything else, but he doesn't know about this. It's ours. We have nowhere else to go." With nothing but 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of cherished family photo albums, and the bitter sting of betrayal, the elderly couple loaded their rusted 1998 Ford Taurus. They drove out of Peoria without looking back, leaving behind the ghost of the life they had built, and headed south toward the unforgiving wilderness of the Ozarks. The drive into the heart of Newton County, Arkansas, was a grueling test of endurance. The paved highways eventually gave way to cracked asphalt, which then dissolved into a treacherous, winding dirt logging road that threatened to tear the suspension out of their aging sedan. By the time Raoul and Beatrice finally navigated the final steep incline, the sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the dense pine forest. When they finally laid eyes on Vernon's cabin, Beatrice had to stifle a sob of despair. The photograph the lawyer provided had been generous. The structure was a relic of decay. The porch roof was buckling under the weight of accumulated dead leaves and moss. The logs were weather-beaten and grey, with thick clumps of dried mud serving as failing insulation between the timber. Inside, it was even worse. The air was thick with the suffocating stench of mildew, dust, and abandonment. There was no electricity, no running water, and only a massive, soot-stained stone fireplace to serve as a source of heat. The only furniture consisted of a rusted iron bed frame, a heavy oak dining table, and a few wooden chairs that looked as though they would splinter under any significant weight. For the first month, survival was an agonizing, daily battle. November brought brutal, biting winds that howled through the gaps in the cabin walls. Raoul, despite his aching joints and failing knees, spent hours every day chopping firewood from fallen timber just to keep them from freezing to death at night. Beatrice, drawing water from a nearby freshwater spring, learned to cook canned beans and dried rice over an open flame, her hands constantly raw and blistered from the cold. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological agony was worse. In the dead of night, huddled under 3 layers of moth-eaten wool blankets, Raoul would listen to Beatrice weep. She wasn't just crying for their freezing hands or their empty stomachs. She was mourning Derek, the son she had nurtured, the boy whose scraped knees she had kissed, had condemned them to this frozen purgatory so he could maintain his country club memberships and luxury cars. The betrayal was an open, bleeding wound in their hearts that no amount of time seemed to heal. By mid-December, a severe winter storm descended upon the Ozarks. The sky turned a bruised, violent purple, and snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. The temperature plummeted to single digits. Inside the cabin, the situation was growing desperate. A section of the roof near the back wall had begun to leak freezing slush, creating a puddle of icy water that threatened to rot the floorboards. Raoul, his chest rattling with a deep, persistent cough that terrified Beatrice, was desperately trying to patch the leak from the inside using an old plastic tarp he had found in a dilapidated shed out back. "Raoul, please, sit down," Beatrice begged, wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders as she fed another log into the fireplace. "Your breathing sounds awful. The tarp can wait." "If I don't nail this down, the damp is going to creep to the hearth, Bear," Raoul wheezed, hammering a rusted nail into the timber above. He stepped down heavily from a wooden chair, his boots landing with a heavy thud on the floorboards near the fireplace. As his weight hit the wood, Raoul paused. He frowned, stepping back and stomping his heel against the floor again. Thud. Hollow. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in his joints. "Bea, bring me the oil lantern." Beatrice hurried over, the dim yellow light flickering across her husband's confused face. Raoul ran his calloused hands over the heavy, interlocking oak planks adjacent to the stone hearth. "Feel this," he muttered. "There's a draft coming from underneath. And the wood, it's not nailed to the joists here. It's a separate panel." Curiosity overriding his exhaustion, Raoul grabbed the claw end of his hammer and wedged it into a tight seam between the boards. He pried upward with all his remaining strength. With a loud, agonizing groan of protesting wood, a square section of the floor, roughly 4 feet wide, popped loose. Raoul and Beatrice pushed the heavy oak panel aside. Beneath it was not the dirt foundation they expected, but a solid slab of smooth, poured concrete. Set directly into the center of the concrete was a massive rusted iron ring attached to a heavy steel trapdoor. "Vernon was a survivalist," Beatrice whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at the iron ring. "The lawyer said he lived off the grid. Do you think it's a root cellar? A bunker?" "Only one way to find out," Raoul grunted. He gripped the freezing iron ring with both hands. His arms shook, the veins in his neck bulging as he strained against decades of rusted inertia. For a moment, it refused to budge. Then, with a harsh, metallic screech that echoed through the small cabin, the steel door gave way, swinging upward on heavy hinges. A rush of dry, remarkably stale air blew up into their faces. It didn't smell like damp earth or rot. It smelled like dust, old paper, and machine oil. Raoul held the oil lantern out over the precipice. The flickering light revealed a steep, narrow set of stairs carved directly into solid limestone, descending deep into total darkness. "I'm going down," Raoul said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and irresistible intrigue. "You can't be serious. It could be unsafe. The air could be bad," Beatrice protested, though she found herself leaning closer to the opening. "We are freezing to death in a rotting cabin, Bea. We have absolutely nothing left to lose," Raoul replied softly. He took the lantern and slowly, carefully began to descend the limestone steps, his boots echoing sharply in the cavernous silence. Beatrice, unable to let him go alone, gripped the rough stone wall and followed close behind. They walked down 20, then 30, then 40 steps, venturing deeper into the earth. The ambient temperature grew remarkably warmer, the bitter, freezing cold of the cabin above fading into a consistent, dry climate. When they finally reached the bottom, the lantern light illuminated a heavy, reinforced steel door with a complex mechanical dial in the center. It looked like a bank vault door, entirely out of place beneath a rotting log cabin. But the door wasn't locked. It stood slightly ajar, as if Vernon had left it open before making his final, fateful trip up to the surface years ago. Raoul pushed the heavy steel door open. They stepped inside. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, the oil lantern shaking violently in Raoul's grip as the light danced across the room. It was an underground chamber, roughly the size of their old hardware store, lined with meticulously organized steel shelving. But it wasn't stocked with canned food, survival gear, or ammunition. Stacked from the floor to the ceiling, wrapped in heavy, vacuum-sealed industrial plastic, were towering bricks of United States currency. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. Alongside the cash were dozens of heavy canvas bags stamped with the insignias of international gold exchanges, overflowing with solid gold bullion. Raoul stepped forward, his breathing shallow, and brushed his fingers against the nearest stack. He looked at the denomination on the wrappers. $100 bills, pristine, unmarked, and perfectly preserved in the climate-controlled vault. Vernon Hayes hadn't just been a paranoid survivalist. He had been hoarding something monumental. And now, the betrayed, destitute couple standing in the dim lantern light were standing in the center of a $265 million empire. For what felt like hours, Raoul and Beatrice remained frozen in the subterranean silence, the flickering yellow light of their lantern dancing across a fortune so immense it defied comprehension. The sheer volume of wealth, towers of vacuum-sealed $100 bills and stacked canvas bags of gold, felt entirely alien beneath the rotting floorboards of a forgotten Ozark cabin. Slowly, Raoul approached a heavy metal desk situated in the far corner of the vault. Resting squarely in the center was a rusted steel lockbox. Next to it lay a leather-bound ledger and a handwritten letter encased in a protective plastic sleeve. He carefully extracted the letter, bringing it close to the lantern glass. The handwriting was sharp, erratic, and heavily slanted. It read, "To whoever breaks the seal on this tomb, know that you are standing in the graveyard of my paranoia. I am Vernon Hayes." In the 1970s, I was a primary silent partner in a defense logistics firm in Washington. I watched the world operate from the shadows, saw the greed of men, and realized that governments and markets are built on a foundation of sand. Before the crash of '87, I liquidated everything. I converted my shares through Swiss intermediaries into physical, untraceable assets. Gold holds its truth. Cash buys silence. I buried it here, waiting for the end of the world. But the world didn't end. I just grew old. If you have found this, I am dead. Do not trust banks. Do not trust the state. Use this to protect yourself from the wolves. Beatrice placed a trembling hand on Raoul's shoulder. "He hid from the world," she whispered, her voice echoing softly off the concrete walls. "He had all this power, and he chose to die alone in the dark." "But we aren't going to die in the dark, Bear," Raoul replied, his voice suddenly steady, infused with a strength he hadn't felt in years. "Derek threw us to the wolves, but Vernon just gave us the teeth to fight back." They did not act rashly. Survival had taught them patience. The following morning, Raoul carefully extracted a single brick of $100 bills, exactly $100,000, from the vault. They resealed the trapdoor, covered it with the oak panel, and drove their sputtering Ford Taurus 3 hours to a bustling commercial hub in Springfield, Missouri. Their first purchases were purely survival-based, yet deeply profound. For the first time in months, they ate a hot meal in a warm restaurant. They bought heavy winter coats, a reliable generator, space heaters, and a massive stockpile of non-perishable food. But Raoul knew that depositing even a fraction of Vernon's hoard into a local bank would instantly trigger federal flags, asset seizures, and an IRS investigation that could lock the money in litigation for a decade. They needed an expert. During his years running the hardware store, Raoul had avidly read financial journals. He remembered reading a profile in the Wall Street Journal about a legendary, ruthless asset protection attorney based in Dallas, Texas, a man named Harrison Caldwell, known for managing the wealth of reclusive oil barons and handling complex offshore trusts with ironclad discretion. Using a newly purchased prepaid cell phone, Raoul called Caldwell's firm. It took 3 days of relentless persistence and a bold claim of a 9-figure, unregistered physical asset discovery to finally secure a private meeting. A week later, Raoul and Beatrice sat in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Caldwell's Dallas high-rise. Harrison Caldwell, a sharp-eyed man in a flawless, bespoke suit, listened with steepled fingers as Raoul recounted the tale of the inheritance, the foreclosure, and the underground vault. Caldwell was deeply skeptical until Raoul unzipped a heavy duffel bag and placed 3 solid gold bullion bars and 2 vacuum-sealed bricks of 1980s-era currency onto the polished mahogany table. Caldwell stared at the assets, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Mr. and Mrs. Steeves," Caldwell said smoothly, picking up a gold bar to examine the International Mint stamp. "You have a logistical nightmare on your hands, but it is exactly the kind of nightmare my firm specializes in waking you up from." Over the next 2 years, Caldwell orchestrated a masterclass in financial integration. Through a labyrinth of anonymous shell companies, philanthropic blind trusts, and offshore corporate entities, Vernon's hidden empire was slowly bled into the legitimate financial system. The gold was quietly melted, reassessed, and sold through private European brokerages. The IRS received its mandatory capital gains cuts through a meticulously negotiated found property settlement, ensuring the government remained satisfied and oblivious to the true scale of the remaining wealth. After taxes and Caldwell's exorbitant fees, Raoul and Beatrice were left with a legally cleared, liquid net worth of just over $190 million. They did not buy a penthouse in New York or a yacht in the Mediterranean. Instead, they returned to Newton County. Through Caldwell's proxies, they quietly purchased the 3,000 acres of timberland surrounding their 5-acre plot, ensuring absolute privacy. They hired elite, non-disclosure-bound coal contractors to transform the rotting cabin into a masterpiece of modern, off-grid architecture. From the outside, it still maintained the rustic, unassuming profile of a large woodland home. But beneath the timber facade lay reinforced steel framing, state-of-the-art geothermal heating, a massive solar hydro power grid, and a subterranean expansion that seamlessly incorporated Vernon's original vault. They built a sprawling greenhouse for Beatrice and a massive, fully equipped woodworking shop for Raoul. They funded a new medical clinic in the nearest town, saving the failing local economy without ever attaching their names to the donations. They had resurrected themselves from the ashes of their son's betrayal. They were safe, they were healthy, and they were at peace. While Raoul and Beatrice thrived in the quiet sanctuary of the Ozarks, Derek Steeves' empire was burning to the ground. By the winter of 2029, the karma Derek had so ruthlessly ignored finally came to collect. The Chicago real estate market had experienced another sharp correction, and the aggressive, over-leveraged investments Derek had used to prop up his firm collapsed entirely. The SEC launched a massive investigation into his handling of client trusts, specifically the unauthorized liquidation of vulnerable family assets. The stress of the impending indictments fractured his personal life. Patricia, realizing the money was gone and the social stigma was permanent, filed for a brutal, highly publicized divorce. She took the remaining liquid cash, his luxury cars, and left him with a mountain of legal debt, facing potential federal prison time and eviction from his rented bachelor apartment. Derek was a desperate, hollowed-out shell of the arrogant executive he had once been. As he frantically scoured his files for any remaining assets to liquidate for attorney fees, he stumbled across a forgotten folder containing the probate documents for his great-uncle Vernon's estate. He remembered the 5-acre plot of land in Arkansas. He hadn't spoken to his parents in over 3 years. He didn't even know if they were still alive. If they had perished out there in the wilderness, the land would legally default to him as the sole heir. Even if it was just a patch of dirt, he could sell it to a logging company for a quick $50,000. It was his last, desperate lifeline. Derek drove a rented high-mileage compact car down into Arkansas, his stomach churning with a toxic mix of anxiety and unresolved guilt. As he navigated the old county roads, he expected to find the treacherous dirt path he had seen on the satellite maps. Instead, his GPS directed him onto a perfectly paved, immaculately maintained private asphalt road winding deep into the forest. Confused, Derek followed the road for 3 miles until he reached a massive wrought-iron security gate flanked by stone pillars. High-definition security cameras tracked his vehicle's approach. There was a sleek intercom system mounted on a pedestal. Derek rolled down his window, shivering in the brisk December air, and pressed the button. "Hello? I'm looking for the Hayes property. I think my GPS took me to the wrong place." A moment later, a crisp, professional voice came through the speaker. "State your name and business, please." "Derek Steeves. I'm looking for my parents, Raoul and Beatrice Steeves." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then, without a word, the heavy iron gates silently swung open. Derek drove his rental car up the winding, meticulously landscaped driveway, his jaw slowly dropping. The dense timber opened up to reveal a stunning estate. The original log cabin had been seamlessly integrated into a sprawling, modern timber and glass mansion overlooking a private, crystal-clear lake. A massive solar array gleamed in the winter sun, and a high-end luxury SUV was parked in the heated driveway. He parked his dented rental car next to the SUV and stepped out, utterly bewildered. The front door of the estate opened, and 2 figures stepped out onto the expansive, heated wraparound porch. Derek froze. It was Raoul and Beatrice, but they were entirely transformed. Raoul stood tall, wearing a tailored wool sweater, his silver hair neatly trimmed, looking healthier and more robust than he had a decade ago. Beatrice looked elegant, her posture proud, wrapped in a luxurious cashmere shawl. They did not look like the destitute, broken people he had banished from Peoria. They looked like royalty. "Mom? Dad?" Derek stammered, stumbling up the stone steps, his eyes darting frantically over the expensive stonework and the vast estate. What is this? Did you strike oil? Did you win the lottery? Raoul did not smile. He looked down at his son with the cold, detached gaze of a man studying a stranger. Hello, Derek. Derek's desperation immediately hijacked his initial shock. He rushed forward, falling to his knees on the bottom step, tears streaming down his face. Dad, Mum, you have to help me. Everything is gone. Patricia left me. The SEC is trying to put me in federal prison for the trust liquidations. I have nothing. I don't even have a place to sleep next month. Please, whatever this is, whatever you found, you have to bail me out. I'm your son. Beatrice looked at the man weeping on her steps. For years, she had cried in the freezing dark for this boy. She had mourned his soul. But looking at him now, seeing that he only sought them out because he needed something to consume, the final thread of a mother's blind devotion quietly snapped. She walked slowly down the steps and stood over him. When you took our home, Beatrice said, her voice soft, yet carrying the cutting weight of absolute finality. When you took the store your father built with his bare hands, you told us it was just business. You told us we should have read the fine print. Derek sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I was wrong. I was arrogant. I'm sorry. No, Derek. You aren't sorry you betrayed us. Raoul stepped forward, his voice like grinding stone. You're just terrified that you finally got caught. You sent us out here to die in the freezing cold so you could keep your country club memberships. We survived in spite of you, not because of you. Please, Derek begged, looking up at his mother. I'll do anything. I'll work for you. Just pay for my lawyers. Don't let them lock me in a cage. Beatrice reached into the pocket of her shawl. She pulled out a neatly folded, yellowed piece of paper and handed it to Derek. Derek's hands shook as he unfolded it, expecting a check or a banker's note. It was the original notice of foreclosure and eviction from Peoria County, the exact document that had destroyed their lives. We survived the wolves, Derek, Beatrice said, turning her back on him and walking slowly back up the stairs to stand beside her husband. But we will not feed them. You are trespassing on private property. If you are not off this estate in 3 minutes, the security team will have you arrested. Mom! Derek screamed, the reality of his absolute ruin crashing down upon him as he stared at the foreclosure notice. You can't do this! I'm your blood! Our blood, Raoul said quietly, closing his hand around his wife's. Froze in this dirt 3 years ago. Goodbye, Derek. Raoul and Beatrice turned and walked back inside their fortress, the heavy reinforced oak door clicking shut behind them, the locks engaging with a heavy metallic thud. Derek was left entirely alone on the steps, clutching the foreclosure notice in the freezing wind. He looked around at the towering silent pines and the sprawling, multi-million-dollar empire his parents commanded. He had sacrificed the only people who had ever truly loved him for a fleeting taste of power in the city. And now, in the unforgiving heart of the Ozarks, he finally understood the true cost of his betrayal. He climbed back into his dented rental car, shifted it into gear, and drove slowly back down the mountain, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, exiled to the very ruin he had created. If this story of ultimate betrayal, hidden millions, and sweet justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with a friend who loves a satisfying plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss another incredible true-life saga. Have you ever discovered a hidden family secret? Let us know down in the comments below.